Australia. All right. People at the back, Chris, do you see them? See them? Oh, sorry, you're going somewhere. Okay, did not mean to stop you. Yeah, we're just trying to talk. Start the next talk. So if I can have everyone seated. Okay. I'm just gonna do what I do. I'm actually impressed that people listen to me. Considering like I was the youngest one and like 14 kids. Um, anyway, no, one of the reasons why I'm like so excited about this next talk is because like I feel like it's a combination of like, a shared interest in people. Like all of us, like I think 99% of the people in this room are founders, right? And we all want like money in some form, like either like VC funding or like crowdfunding or like revenue. And mostly because San Francisco is just so expensive, right? Like how do you survive as a startup, like if you're not raising funding or if you're like not making money, right? So part of the thing that we try to do at Founders Village is like either like bring those resources for you to raise funding or bring that information to you to raise funding, but just help you in your journey so you can just keep going and keep growing your company, right? So this next talk kind of like came together in a very interesting way, and I was personally also very interested because I'm a psychologist, and before I started Founders Village, I was a practicing psychologist. So whenever I'm like approaching anything, I'm always thinking like, what's going on in someone else's mind, or like, how can I think about it from like human psychology's perspective, right? And then me and our speaker, we were just you might be thinking like it's so mysterious, like who's coming? Like she keeps saying speaker, right? But me and the next speaker, like we were just like talking about it, and then we came together with a thought that maybe we should talk about it. And it's called social contracts and fundraising, right? And we're going to talk more about it. But first, I want to introduce our next speaker, Daniel Idzkowski, who is a 5-time founder, born and raised in San Francisco, and helped raise 300 companies funding. And he's now a partner at LvlUp Ventures, and also a managing director of American Pillow Partners. And it's so funny, like I have no idea like how he does all these things, like he has like 9 lives or something, right? But he has been incredibly helpful to all the founders in our community. And I was very interested in like bringing his information and his wealth of knowledge and like how he founded 5 companies, exited them, and like raised money for himself and other startups. So it was only natural that I like wanted to invite him as a speaker and then talk about it in front of you guys. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Daniel. Everyone, please give a huge round of applause. by the community, right?
I hope so.
No, Daniel has been coming to our events like since the first event when we used to do it in our backyard, and ever since then, in the past 2 years, just past 2 years alone, I've seen you grow so much, right? And
Mostly horizontally.
yeah, and it's interesting. Most of the time, when we chat, Daniel always has a very interesting, a new perspective on things. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic, social contracts. First of all, please let us know what are social contracts and what do they mean in the space of startups?
Yeah, so to start, actually, I want to thank whose ever giant cup this is. It was the last one left, so I appreciate it. And to answer your earlier question, I'm actually one of 3 triplets, all identical. So that's how I'm kidding. But yeah, social contracts. The reason I started telling founders and talking about this is because I've seen more pre-seed and seed founders fail to raise fundraising because they did not abide by certain social standards, social contracts, than checking a performance box. And for me personally, it became frustrating and kind of sad because there's legitimately a lot of incredibly talented founders doing really incredible things. So it was kind of a personal passion that eventually turned into, I'm writing a book on this as well. So it's turned into kind of a culmination of all my experiences, both as a founder, investor, and someone in investor relations who's kind of bridged the gap and worked with both sides as a mediator, helping companies raise capital as well. But what a social contract is the unspoken rules of interaction with an investor and a founder, and it's the culture that is derived from that. So there's a lot of these popular questions that stem from that, like who should follow up? How do you follow up? How do you pitch an investor? How do you start that conversation? Who pays? So there's a lot of things that stem from that as well. But it's been a big passion of mine for the last few years to help founders bridge that gap.
Nice. And would you say is it something good to have or a need to have? Because I hear a lot of people say they're I would love to, but I feel I can get by without it. If my numbers are right, if my pitch deck is great, I don't have to make a great impression on the investor. So yeah, is it good to have or is it need to have?
So this is context driven. I know most of you here are founders in some way, shape, or form. How many are pre-seed or seed founders?
Oh, wow.
So over 80%. So this is going to be particularly relevant to you guys. And one of the big, secrets is at the pre-seed and seed stage, it is not about your idea. It's not about even your execution, to be honest. It's about you as a founder and your founding team. And that's it. And how you behave to investors, because what we're looking for is, are you able to inspire people, smart people around you, to build this into a unicorn company? That's what we're looking for in pre-seed, and that's what we're investing in. And as it turns out, it only works out from a financial sense 1% of the time. And if you look at founders that actually turn into CEOs of billion-dollar plus companies, that's closer to 0.1% of those that raise venture. So it's very, very uncommon to get that combination of skills, social skills. But that is more important than what your company does. Is how you behave and your charisma. Are you able to communicate yourself? The biggest green flag for me is when I meet a founder and they somehow have 2 people that are getting paid only in equity that could be making $500,000 at Google working on this app for them. That is the biggest green flag for me. So I would say this is absolutely a must-have, need to have in the pre-seed and seed stage. especially as a founder.
That's great. And, it's interesting, like SF is like a very diverse place, right? So you see a lot of cultures like interacting with each other. And I feel like every single culture has their own social contract, right? People from like Europe and like people from like Asia, South Asia, and then something that might be correct and like one culture might not be, or it could be perceived differently. So how do you think like cultural differences like matter, and what is a neutral way? Like how does one like blend that and like come together with like one recipe that works?
So Silicon Valley, I think, does have its own culture, but within Silicon Valley, there's also a lot of subcultures because there's so much diversity. So if the investor you're pitching is, let's say, from Korea, you should probably approach that a little bit differently than if the investor is from India or from Poland or Eastern Europe. So there's also all these subcultures. So it's all about preparation and just knowing kind of what those standard norms are. I don't know if I should give too many examples or not, but
well, you can.
So for example, you might encounter an investor from Korea, and if you are substantially younger than that investor, then generally speaking, for our clients that are founders and we're helping them raise, it's a sign of respect not to drink alcohol in front of them. And that's something that, unless you look it up, you won't know, right? Right off the bat, let me ask you guys this. How many of you had an investor meeting? It seemed to go great. They love your company, and then they ghost you.
Everyone, I think. How many? Can we have a raise of hands? Well, and everyone else has never been ghosted?
No one's ever been ghosted by an investor where they stopped replying to an email, something happened, but it seemed like it was going great. Well, these are the things. The reason I'm saying up here is because, unfortunately, a part of Silicon Valley culture, especially venture culture, the venture game has gone through various different cycles. It started out with really successful entrepreneurs becoming venture capitalists, and then it became a bunch of Harvard and Stanford MBAs, and then it's reverting back to successful entrepreneurs being VCs. That's kind of the trend. But right now, the majority of VCs, the culture is very indirect. So if you're from a culture that's very direct, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, it's going to be a culture shock to you. They'll never tell you exactly what's wrong with your company or you personally. That's one big thing, right? So it is a little bit of a culture shock there. They're very indirect, and I don't know what else can I add to that.
I would say like social cues. Like, how does one like read social cues? Like, and maybe the context of what I'm thinking. Like, you said something about like Middle East, and then So, I grew up in the Middle East, and people are extremely hospitable. Even if they don't want to do business with you, they would still offer you food. They would still take you out for dinner. And then later you'd be like, you want to do business with me? They're like, no. And I'm like, why did you take me out to dinner? And they would be like, because I just want to be hospitable. Most of the time they're doing it for themselves. As opposed to like when I've noticed, like when I'm in America, people like you, most of the time, like, they're very direct, right? And they would just tell you, right? So how does one read social cues? Like if the other person is treating me in a certain way, or like is the other person has a certain personality, how should I behave, or like,
I think most people are pretty good at reading social cues. It's that they choose not to, most founders. They're in a mindset where the only thing that matters is that I have a cool idea, a cool startup, and there's this presumption that whoever I'm pitching as an investor will also think it's cool. But the reality is, at the pre-seed and seed stage, it's entirely about the founder and how you approach that conversation, right? And my biggest advice from a social cues perspective is always lead with value. When I was raising capital for various companies I founded, even when I didn't have a whole lot of money, right, I found ways to add value. So if there was a VC, I would look up their portfolio companies, and I would think about, how can I make this VC look good? And I would go to hackathons and I would meet really smart people. And then I saw that one of the portfolio companies at this VC fund were desperately looking for an advisor in this very specialized field, somebody with a master's in AI, let's say. And I happened to meet that person at a hackathon. And the first thing I would say is, I noticed that your portfolio company is looking for somebody in AI. I'd love to make that introduction for you. And it kind of flips the script there. And because right off the bat, it's not about, monetary exchange or anything like that. It's about showing that you have the capacity as a founder to inspire, empower, and influence. In the pre-seed stage, your job as a CEO founder is going to be inspiring people to work on the same idea and get underpaid for 5 years. That is your job. That is the distillation of a founding CEO. So that's the number one thing that an investor is looking for. Do you have that ability? If you don't, find the co-founder.
Okay, that's an easy one, right? And I want to get down to the specifics. Like, let's say like we had to break it down to like every single step of the way of like meeting a VC. I'm meeting a VC for the first time. We are at a networking event, right? And most of the time, like what I've seen happening is like, you go to a networking event and like you say like I'm a VC or something, like I'm some form of like ability of like to help you. People just like go and like just tell their pitch, right? And they would go to everyone and just like tell their pitch, right? 15-second pitch. Hi, this is my name. That's what I'm working on. And then just like looking at your face. And they expect like one of the VCs is going to be like, oh, here's $100,000. Use it, right? I'm pretty sure like that's not how it works, right? So if you were to break it down step by step, you're seeing a VC for the first time. What do? What's the best approach?
Yeah, so think of it this way. I can learn about the technical specifics of your company and idea and pitch from your pitch deck. And I can do that whenever I want once you email it to me. What I cannot deduce from that pitch deck is who you are as a founder. And do you have these attributes? And are you going to take this company to unicorn status within 5 years? Let's say 7 years. Because VCs, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the structure, but we have bosses too. They're called limited partners. They're the people that give us money. And then we take a small fee and some carry in order to find the best companies to invest in and kind of foresee the future. So, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is distill all of these intangibles. When we meet you in person and you pitch us in person, it's not very useful pitching us the semantics of your company or your idea because it does not communicate who you are necessarily. Some founders are very, very good. Generally, they're on their 4th or 5th companies, and they can do both. They normally have a one-liner, but they've already worked the room before they even started speaking to you. They have a coffee in hand. They've looked you up beforehand. They know you like a certain type of tea. I'll tell a few stories. How I raised some money for my companies. I've also raised over $100,000 by gifting a $50 Cuban cigar to an investor.
Nice.
That sounds like a pretty good investment, right?
Oh, totally.
And that's only because I looked up this investor. I knew that they loved this specific kind of cigar and it's hard to get. And I had $400 in my bank account at that time. And I spent 50 of that to buy a cigar that had to be shipped to Switzerland first for some reason, and then shipped here just so when I met with this investor, I can show a gesture of how much I valued their time. Another example is I had a founder that I was advising, and I set up a meeting with a pretty prominent Silicon Valley VC. And then I kind of had them run with it. And the VC ended up driving an hour to San Francisco to meet, for lunch, and then spent an hour with them, drove an hour back down south. And it went great. It was a great company. And then the founder told me, hey, I haven't heard back from them. I'm like, so what happened? Did you like bomb the pitch? Or it's like, no, I think I did great. So I'm like, okay, so this VC spent 3 hours of their time in traffic. Did you offer to buy them lunch? You know? And they're like, no, but they're the ones with the money.
Nice.
And the look of disappointment, you know, took me a week to shake from there, because it's not about that fact. It's about the gesture, because there's no way you can pay for their time. This VC probably, if I had to guess, makes like $3,000 per hour. That was a $9,000 meeting. And it's more so that founder told that VC is, you're not worth $9,000. You're not even worth the $20 lunch to me. So that was the problem, right? And that's what saddens me about a lot of founder investor communication and all these social contracts, is I see so many founders struggle and have these challenges because they just don't have that foundational cultural experience. The top founders that are really, really thriving in fundraising come from what I call fight for check cultures. Like, that was one of the underlying baselines when I ran all the data from my investor relations company. We're talking thousands of companies, from any, companies that pitched me through various accelerator connections or involvements that I have. And I was looking for cues of who's succeeding in fundraising, who's not. And I was looking at schools too. I'm like, okay, why are these kids from Stanford and Berkeley doing so well? But the one underlying thing was, most of them came from fight for check cultures. They came from Eastern European culture, Asian cultures, Indian cultures, Arabic cultures, etc. And I noticed this, and I realized that we need to fix this gap, because there's so many good founders from other cultures, and this is a melting pot where if you don't figure that out, it's just going to create this dichotomy where only certain types of founders are succeeding. And so I'm very, very passionate about that. And that was just one example, but I have hundreds of them.
That's great. But, I would love to hear examples from people as well. But yeah, I think this is a very interesting story. Most of the time, we never think about how a small gesture could totally turn everything around. I've totally seen that happening. So we were going step by step, right? So you've seen the investor for the first time. Obviously, you mentioned, you're not going to pitch, right? What's next? One of the things that I'm always interested in talking about is your first impression that you leave on that person. And part of that is how you're dressed up. And there's just a really big Patagonia culture, right? You see a Patagonia and you're like, oh, I see a Patagonia over there. Yeah. So you see a Patagonia and you're like, oh, that's a founder, or North Face, that's a private equity or something, right? And then there are people who are non-technical founder, non-founders, and they're like, I want to wear a Patagonia just to look the part, right? How important, first of all, is dressing, how you dress, and what impression that you leave, and then B, how important is Patagonia? Do we all need to buy a $300 jacket? I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people who enter America with 2 months of rent. Do they need to spend, invest in Patagonia?
That's a great question. San Francisco is very polarizing in terms of clothing, what people wear. I think in one way or another, it is an expression of who you are as a person. From a fundraising perspective, though, my advice is understand the person that you want to, let's say, raise capital from, the investor, and dress one level above that, So if they are a shorts and t-shirt and flip-flops VC, there's quite a few of those, you wear a polo. Right? Or the female equivalent. If they are a dress shirt.
What is the female equivalent of polo or or shorts and flip-flops, right?
Honestly, I don't know. And the truth is,
we'd love to know. I feel no one talks about it. We always talk about male founders, right? Kara is she's nodding, right? And then, also because women over 30, 35, like we have amazing dresses, right? And then if I wear them, like no one treats me like a founder. So I have to like go back and like wear like a, bad hoodie and like a t-shirt. So yeah, it will have to know, like, what do we wear as female founders?
There we go.
Nice.
I think I focus, I'm also focusing more on the men here because I think the men get this wrong more often. But I think as long as you're kind of showing that you are respectful or value the time of that investor and actually doesn't look like you just rolled out of bed, that's fine. You don't need to buy expensive brands or anything like that. I don't think that's a necessity, but don't show up to, let's say an investor who is, over 60, traditionally was a banker or a doctor their entire life and wears a collar shirt every day in a tank top, right? Generally speaking. Okay. And there's a few of you in here, like there's one guy with a blazer with a pocket square. A lot of people will think, oh, that's too dressed up for Silicon Valley. But the reality is I look at someone like that, a founder like that, and I'm like, I can introduce this person to my VC friends that are wearing flip-flops and shorts, but I can also introduce them to my VC friends that wear suits every day and came from the banking world, and they're just from that generation, right? So it opens up the doors tremendously. So it is something to kind of keep awareness of, for sure.
Yeah, no, I've seen that and I've heard that a lot. And I've actually seen like some non-technical founders wanting to dress up like technical founders, wanting to, seem like they're technical enough, right? And then earlier we were having this conversation about the fact that has SF always been like that? Or like, is it the SF culture? Or is it like, we're just like making it a hoodie culture?
There's nothing wrong with hoodies. I think the reality is there's just a lot of investors that, choose to not be dressed up. So the hoodie is okay in that case, right? Right. So it's more of an investor fit from that standpoint. But, there are a lot of investors that, are the Patagonia vest investors. And when they're in a collar shirt and a Patagonia vest, which is 90% of them, you probably should at least wear a collar shirt and try to show that you tried. Right. You're taking the time, you're being purposeful. It's going back to personality. It shows attention to detail. And to a degree, this depends on industry too, like tremendously. Like if you're in a very creative industry, I think at the end of the day, it's about being purposeful with how you present yourself, both your character and on the outside.
Gotcha. Like look the part. Okay, so going back to first impression, imagine so now you've ran into a VC, you're not wearing the right thing, you did not say the right thing, right? So you've totally messed up the first time. Is there a way to redo that? And if there is, how do you do that?
Unfortunately, it's really hard because most VCs are extremely indirect and they won't tell you, they will just ghost you. That's kind of VC culture these days. This is why we're doing this talk. This is a talk you will not hear. These are things you won't hear from a VC, frankly. It is not logical for a VC to even tell you structured feedback, even though most founders would prefer that. For them, it's a risk because if you give them feedback and then they succeed, they're scared that you're not going to come back to them. When they reach out and they see you're raising and you're a rocket ship company, to them, they'd rather be neutral and be like, oh, the email slipped my mind, somehow, or slipped into spam, whatever the excuse is. But for me, coming as a founder turned investor, I think it's anti-constructive not to give that feedback. And that's what I try to do at the minimum. If we get to a point where I think they have the character attributes that I want to hear about their business, I will at least tell them what I like about their idea, their business, and then how they can improve it. And I've written, for some strange reason, 3 or 4 paragraph emails at 3 a.m. back to founders with suggestions of different business models, marketing strategies, not portfolio companies, but like that's what you want. You want that feedback, and you want to get to a place where an investor wants to give you that feedback.
Did he get ghosted after that? Did he get a response? After constructive feedback? I mean, it's a joke. But.
No, I mean, they basically at that point, they did the right thing and said, could we add you to our quarterly list
Okay, that's
to keep us updated, which is the best way of keeping in touch with an investor, because it is the barometer for the second most important thing in category for investments, which is your speed of execution and your capability to execute. So,
sorry.
Yeah. So if every month you're sending an email, and in that email, those updates are a very meaningful amount of progress, whatever it is, that gets an investor's attention.
And the reason I asked is, I know it sounds like a silly question. The reason I asked is because like when people are sending out emails and they're sending out their pitch decks, they hear like from 90%, they hear a no, right? And then the common response is like, you read that email and you're like, this investor does not like me. I did not go to Stanford or something. They read that email, they totally forget that now I'm ghosting this person. They never, write back. And I feel like, and then you give the example that some of them actually added you to the quarterly email. And then it might have happened that maybe 6 months later or 8 months later, you might have invested in them, right? So here's another social contract that, if someone says no, then what do you do? Like, do you rebuild your relationship? And like, how do you rebuild your relationship? And I think you mentioned like by keeping in touch with them.
I think the problem with most Silicon Valley investors is that you won't get a no, which is why the title of my book is "Hurry Up and Say No."
Okay.
Like it's kind of a play on both the social constructs of founders and investors. So in the investor relations world, I've had to train as many investors as I've had to train founders as well. Because there's a lot of room for improvement for investors too. And sadly, it's not good enough just to go to a VC boot camp anymore. You won't get everything you have. And there's a massive, massive trend now where the top 1% of founders don't want to work with a VC that hasn't gone through the pains of starting a company. You can't relate, right? So my friends are on their 4th, 5th companies, and they're raising from, tier 1 VCs and running unicorns. That's their number one criteria. But does that kind of answer that to a degree?
Well, it kind of does, but like, I was just thinking that since I've never raised money, like I bootstrapped my previous company, I'm bootstrapping this company. So I've had like less and less of those like VC, interactions. But I'm pretty sure like a lot of people in this room have had like many VC interactions, like if they're raising money. So it might be interesting to hear, like, were there any interesting stories of like, I see you, Ree. No, I'm gonna come to you, but like I was just gonna say like, social bloopers, if you were to talk about it, right? Any awkward moments, like if anyone want to share, and then maybe you can answer like, if how could we redo that? So yeah, Ree, starting with you. I'm waiting for the social blooper here. He sounds like a nice guy.
It just gets so much worse than this. Okay, so his argument. So he had me run my former startup was a hybrid company. So it meant that my bar was a for-profit, but my cat rescue was a 501c3, which is supposed to prep me for a 501c4, which is a political campaign. He wanted to prep me for being a political figure. He was a casino magnate that happened to attract political figures. That's what he did. And his argument
This sounds like a longer story. How about like we move to like a smaller blooper?
Long story short,
Okay, you have 5 seconds. 5, 4, and I can be casual with her because like we went to Draper University together. So I mean, we're classmates.
so if you're at that point, if you ghost someone, it is not only because you messed up as a founder, you have to prove that you want that founder or you want that investor more than you want these other investors that are fighting for you. So his argument was when they ghost you, you have to fight like hell to get them back. So do you not agree with that?
So let me distill your question here. The distillation of that is, how do you deal with an investor whose time is so valuable that there's no way an investment in your company could ever justify it, let's say. So there's quite a lot of investors like that. And the simple answer is you do not pitch the monetary value of your company. You don't pitch the return. You pitch the intangibles. You pitch experiences. You pitch introductions, connections. So for example, one of my hobbies is distilling alcohol and spirits. I'm Polish. I grew up in a Polish family. It kind of runs in the blood. And my party trick is I distill things from stuff that no one else distills, like Buddha's hand and carrots, things that are commercially inviable. And I'll throw these like tasting events where it's like all these different spirits you can taste that you've never had before. And I'll invite investors to that. And it's very simple. Do you want access to these kinds of fun things? I'm also, created a tequila that's never been done before. I've also created a bike lock that explodes with pepper spray. Do you want the new prototypes 6 months before they come out? Obviously, as you build more and more companies, you have more and more unique value that you can give that person that isn't ROI, that isn't return on investment. It's access. I have some friends that are famous musicians. So you want to meet those people. Obviously, there's a process in that, but that's a very difficult question because what can you give a person that's $1 million an hour? Right?
Justify his time. He ghosted me and then sent me people because he sent me people that were worth less an hour than he was to challenge me through tests that I was failing, and that was how he got me to basically deal with what I was failing at. But his argument was when an investor ghosts you, if you really want them to be an investor, it's like a marriage. You have to fight like hell to get them back. First thing, you want them instead of no one else. So if they ghost you, you have to just keep on fucking fighting for them. So you disagree with that?
Yes, in short. I don't believe in playing games, and this goes back to me coming from the founder side. I'm a 5-time founder before I'm an investor, right? The reason I'm up here telling everyone this is because I want to help founders. And the simple answer to that is that's not the right investor. Because basically what they're saying and how I would deduce it, and whatever, let's say their name is John. Hopefully that's not their real name. I'd say, John, listen, I can either come here and pitch you a company that will be, a $1 trillion company in 10 years. And that's the only way I'm going to be able to justify this $1 million an hour expectation. And I can go think up the next competitor to OpenAI or something like that, or Google. But the reality is most companies, that's a hard pitch, saying this is not a unicorn, not $1 billion company, but $1 trillion company. And that's what they're asking for. So frankly, that's a little bit unrealistic. If for starters, if you're in the casino business, I'm a mission-driven founder and investor. I'm not a big fan of people that make money on other people's misfortunes, frankly. That is the opposite. That is the opposite of what I believe in. I'm somebody that's trying to solve real problems. And this is going into everyone in this room. The one piece of advice I would say is start a company that has a mission that's not just ROI and not making money. Because today, the lifeblood of a successful company is whether you're able to attract the best talent. And the reality is you're not going to be able to attract the best talent because you won't be able to afford to attract them with just salary. These people command $500,000 a year plus, the best top 1% people, and that's what you need to succeed. So you have to start something where when they go to a social situation like this, they are proud to talk about what they're doing because they are solving a real problem and a real need that people resonate with. He made what? I'm not sure I understand.
Same here. Can we move to another awkward blooper? Right? You know, something that's actually awkward. Yes, please.
You want to be that person who's just like, hey, oh my god, let me tell you all about my company, and like, you know, like what's like a good like intro where you can maybe get something exciting, but then like also you can see a little bit about who you are as a founder, so that you know I'm not just like doing my pitch, which I'm gonna do.
Yeah, so this is where the social cues come in. Be observant. Like, does it look like they're having a good day? Does it look like they're social? Are they having a beer, a wine? It helps to have multiple different interests and conversation starters. And the reality is it's going to depend. It needs to be authentic. And it needs to be you, but it can't be your company. So think about deeply, like, what are some things that, you know, I can shift the conversation into that will eventually get back to who I am as a person and whether we can build a relationship on that foundation. But in general, what you're building, I would argue, should not necessarily be an exact reflection of who you are. Because some of the best companies, the reality is there's probably, you know, 1,000 great ideas at any given point in time. And then the question is, like, are you building one of those ideas? And then are you the right entrepreneur for that idea? And there's different like layers that go through that. But I would say even simple things like how's that wine, you know, is better than going straight for the pitch, because then you at least can share a little bit about yourself first.
Right. And you know, as a follow-up to that question, so, you know, the first time you talked about the wine, or like you built that relationship, and then you met him again and you're like, okay, should I bring up my pitch or not? And then you again have like a social meeting. At what point do you like start talking about the pitch? Like at what point like you get to the point?
So that's a great question. The first thing you have to do with any investor or prospective investor is decide, what kind of relationship do you want to have with this person? And you have to decide, do I ever intend to ask this person of anything? Yes or no. It's binary. If the answer is yes, you have to approach it in one way. At that point, you have to follow all the social contracts, etc. If it's no, and you just want to see, maybe we can be friends, you know, and maybe we'd get along. Maybe we went to the same college or something like that, and we have, you know, something in common, or like the same sports, right? But you have to approach those two things differently. So if you approach it from a perspective that, yes, at some point I'm going to want to ask this person for mentorship, capital, introductions, etc., you have to always lead with value first, show your character, and abide by the social contracts.
Yeah, totally. Yes, please.
I have a question like that. When I started a company, I got a lot of inbound interest the first few weeks of new changing my name. And these were investors reaching out to find out what I was up to. And I did not have an algorithm, and I had a very high level idea of what I was doing. And then I got a whole bunch of messages back from them that I was not ready for them on this particular day. So how do I take this forward? Where I actually how do I like reach out to them in a way that they would engage them?
Lead with value. It's that simple, because what that does is it shows who you are as a founder. Like if you can show that to an investor and basically show them that, impress them, it shows that you can also inspire great teammates, right? It also shows how you interact with customers, right? So it all trickles down, because how you treat an investor, their first thought is always, okay, if this is how you treated me, this is how you're going to treat your co-founders, how you're going to treat your employees, how you're going to treat your clients and customers, how you're going to treat your business partners, et cetera, all the way down the line, right? So what I've done in the past is I've just taken investors out to dinner, lunch, and did a personal catch up, because at that point, if they've reached out to you, the next step is normally you have to show that you are the right founder for that company. So that's what they're trying to extract. So once you get past that, that's when you will start seeing one of two things happen. They might start paying for your lunches. And that's a good sign. Because when an investor in that path starts paying for you, they're basically wanting to buy into your cap table. That's the social contract. Like once they start taking you to dinner, that's them communicating, listen, I like you personally, I like this company, it may not be the right time today, but at some point when I call you and you're raising your Series A, it better be an opportunity, right?
Actually, this makes a lot of sense. It's funny, like I remember like when we started doing Founders Village events, like we were trying to invite more VCs because like we wanted to introduce them to our founders. And then this year I started getting invites to like all the VC mixers. And I would have to tell them, I'm like, I'm not a VC. Like I remember you invited me to a mixer and I was like, I'm not a VC. And it was interesting. Any other questions? Yes, please. Okay, you first. Oh.
I think it depends why they're not investing in you.
I didn't ask for investment. It's just like I really like the guy and I really wanted him to be my mentor. So it's not that I wanted them to invest in me and they rejected me. It's like from the very beginning, I approached them as a very personal mentor me. I really like their approach.
I have a quick question. Are you planning on raising investment from the mentor, or like you're not? Do you think like it would impact your relationship, like if you asked for money?
I know that they invested in me, so that's one of the reasons. The VC that I'm trying to reach out to me invested in me, so that's it. The mentor that I have invested in Series A, and I'm
So going back to leading with value and making the VC look good, if this works out for that VC, then that makes them look good, right? Generally speaking, warm introductions are always better than cold. So I think as long as there's a good reason, like a prospectus fit, then I would always go with the warm introduction, especially if they're close. Go out to dinner, start building a relationship first. It's all because you're pre-seed seed. Remember, VCs do not fund companies, they fund people. And there's no jobs at a pre-seed or seed startup. And by job, I mean, no one works at a startup for a salary or a compensation package. What is in a startup is friendships, apprenticeships, opportunities to do things and learn things that you won't get anywhere else. And an opportunity to do good, right? because you can set the mission. Once you're at a certain stage of a company, you have shareholders. If you're public, it's written that you have to do what's the best interest of your shareholders. And then it gets harder and harder to do mission-driven companies at that point. But almost all start, like really big companies, at this point, I would predict that the next like 20 companies that are multi-billion-dollar unicorns are going to be mission-driven companies. Because ultimately, brand is also one of the things that's very defensible. You want to have defensibility and some sort of distribution arbitrage, always.
Right. I think we're going to take one more. Oh, there too. Okay. One by one. All right. You raised your hand first, so yeah, you go. Oh, okay. Okay, that's cool.
So I have a two-part question. It comes from experiences of first-time founder that was bootstrap, and I didn't even go to bootstrap business. But how did founders or how did investors feel? Have you ever experienced where you wanted to invest in a company and the founder actually rejected that offer? And if that's happened, like what was going through your mind? Have you seen this happening at all in your peers? Just wanted to talk about it in the second part.
I have not personally experienced that, but going back to what I said about the lifeblood of an investor and their success as either a VC or an angel, or even a family office, if that's something they devote a lot of capital, it's about attracting the top 1% of founders. And I have seen a lot of investors get turned down. And it generally happens from the top founders. Frankly, it's not hard to raise capital when you've figured out the formula and you know how to build a good company and you have a great team and you're well funded already, and some of them are already self-funding them. So I've seen it happen actually all the time. One of those reasons was just founder investor fit. The investor never started a company before. And like they say, starting a company is chewing glass and looking into abyss. Very famous quote. If you've never done that, a lot of top founders just, may not resonate in the same ways. Those conversations, you can't really connect on that deep level, and especially pre-seed and seed, it's like a marriage. They say it's like getting married. If it's a lead investor and they become a mentor and sit on your board, you're going to have to see them pretty often, and you want it to be somebody that came from a similar place and understands the struggle. It's not just about the advice, it's about empathy. Because most founders, they don't necessarily want a lot of advice. There's two reasons why you want to found the company. One, you want, let's say, success or to make some sort of impact in the world, financially or otherwise. But two, it's for the experience. If a VC that's done it 5 times before came in and just tried to tell you exactly how to do it for you, it wouldn't be as worthwhile for a founder. So most founders are also looking for empathy from an investor. So you have to have that right fit there.
Does the investor usually try to pursue if they've been rejected by it, or do most investors walk away?
Generally, they walk away, but sometimes they'll do what I call a punt, and they realize at least their EQ is high enough that they realize that the founder doesn't like them for whatever reason, and they'll introduce to somebody else at the firm. But generally speaking, they walk away. There's more than an order of magnitude startups than there is investors in capital. So most investors do not chase deals. I've only seen that in a handful of occasions, and it's normally at a stage where, frankly, the valuation is already pretty inflated. So at that point, in my opinion, it's also kind of too late so it's very uncommon in the pre-seed and seed stage. I think there's more chasing in the Series A and Series B.
Right. I think we're going to take one more question, but when you were talking about advice, I remember one of the VCs told me that he was like, if you're looking for money, ask for advice. And if you're looking for advice, ask for money. I think it made sense. Marianne wanted to ask a question.
You mentioned that the most successful founders fight for a check. What do you mean by that? And then how can women apply that? Right.
And what level of fighting, I think? What counts as fouting? Yeah. What means?
So let me clarify that. Fight for check is not, I'm not talking actually about the check from the investor. I'm talking about the check at the dinner table, the check at lunch, the check for coffee. You know, one of the most ridiculous things that I see sometimes is like a founder will show up late and then the investor ends up buying coffee for the founder just because they're like, hey, you know, I'm here already, I'm in line. You know, where it's kind of it doesn't send the right message. Like at the minimum, you should show up early and come in and do a small gesture and thank them for their time and show a little bit of your personality, because that is a reflection of how you're going to treat your first employees and your co-founders and your customers. And the first 1,000 customers are the hardest. How do you get customers? Ask anybody in sales how they get customers. Not just networking. Personalization, gestures, acts of kindness. Exactly. And there's two things you have to be good at in a technical startup. One is the technical part. The part that people overlook is sales. It's literally sales and technology. That is the perfect combination. I've only met a handful of people that have both. So most teams should have two co-founders. If you're a solo founder, my first question is, code me this and then sell me this. And if not, if they don't do well, then I'm like, where's your co-founder?
Any other questions? Okay, I think just one last one, because like we're wrapping up and like we have to, go to lunch. Yeah.
There's one there.
Yeah, I don't know. We have a question. Oh, okay.
So you talked about the no. So I was wondering how to take front load that no, right? Besides the obvious like reasons of making it too early or invest later or something. How do you get to that no?
That's going to take a book, unfortunately. But what I will say is always think purposefully on how to front load and make sure any no you get is a no for now. Give the investor an easy cop out to say no for now. Tell them we're closing in like 3 months. We're not even raising yet. Right? If you know that there's a low probability that they will fund your company, start building the relationship and front load that no for now. Or if you know that fund hasn't closed yet, look up the VC. Some are fully deployed, right? If you know they're not going to close until March of next year, front load the no for now. Be like, oh, we don't even need the money until March next year, right? So that's one framework to think through, but that is the majority of the content. So it's going to take a book to dive into it.
And I think generally what I can add to it is like, just don't seem too transactional. It's like, oh, like you're not investing money. 3 months later, are you investing money? And then 3 months later, like, I mean, they're human beings too, right? I mean, you should just like maybe build a relationship with them, keep in touch with them, let them know like who you are as a person, so they, they can just like get to know you better. And, remember what I was saying the other day is like, most of the time, like people think like once I get a check from this person, my relationship is ending now, right? If you're gonna be in the same city, you're both gonna be in the startup space, you're gonna run into them again and again and again. You want to show them like, how you're growing as a startup and as a person, right? Yeah. So
yeah, it's about growth, right? Totally. So you want to show personal growth and professional growth to an investor. And the best investors, they tend to follow founders. So the probability of success in your company is very low, especially if this is your first, second, or third company. As it turns out, 3 is the magic number. Your probability of success substantially increases. What you want to do if this is your first, second, or third company is build as many investor relationships so that when you fail, and 99.9% of you will, those same investors fund you again. And I was fortunate to have a number of those investors for when I had my 2 first failures. when the third big one came around, they were my first phone call, and I can make all of that back for them. And that is the best feeling, both for founders and for investors. That is the retribution.
Awesome. Well, I think one thing that we've established from this talk is that, when it comes to fundraising, it's not only about the pitch deck, right? It's not only about the pitch deck. It's not only about the numbers. It's not only about, creating FOMO or something. It's like a collection of things. And one of the most important things is like your relationship, like your social relationship with that person, as opposed to like, just a transactional one. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and for the great questions and being an amazing audience. I think we're going to wrap up today here, and then we're heading to Dahlia Lounge after this, and it's optional. Like we're just gonna go there and like get drinks and like just wrap up today, and then tomorrow we are meeting again at the Marathon Mixer. Again, that's also optional. A lot of people ask me, they were like, if I'm running and if I'm walking, and then what if like I end up at Tesla, sweating? So I'm like, then just like walk slow. And but yeah, I'm excited for the next 2 days and all the conversations that we're gonna have. And we're gonna have a few more conversations around like fundraising, because I feel like this year was very tricky, and we were trying to figure out like how fundraising is gonna be in the next 2 years. So yeah, thank you so much for the talk. And like Daniel is gonna be around the next 2 days for a few events. So feel free to ask him questions. In my personal experience, I've noticed like he's very helpful. He does not ghost. So I think a great person to talk to. Well, thank you once again, and a huge round of applause for Daniel.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your questions as well.
And then see you at Dahlia. And like it's just like a block apart. So yeah, we're just gonna like wrap up here and meet you guys there.